Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. HTM here with some surprise patch notes this week, taking a look at ESO update 39, which is actually being updated on the PTS server right now, so I'm about to jump into that as well. Now, all we knew about this update heading into it was that it was supposed to focus on bug fixes, quality of life improvements. From what I've seen so far, it definitely does that, but also some big balance changes as well. This was a little bit surprising to me, so I wanted to actually cover this in a separate video. Taking a look at some big changes for certain classes and then changes to weapons as well. This is going to be a big change for specific builds, so I want to make sure you guys understand what is going to happen in this latest patch. I believe this is due to hit live servers towards the end of August as well. But we're going to jump right into the gameplay combat section, taking a look at class balance first. Now, not a lot of changes for the Arcanist class, which is kind of surprising. This is week 1 of PTS, so we could potentially see some changes in weeks 3 to 4. Keep that in mind. At least this first round of changes for the Arcanist is mostly focused on bug fixes, so a fix with Abyssal Impact and then Apocryphal Gate. So that's really it for the Arcanist class. Dragon Knights did see a bit of a nerf, and this is on the Combustion passive. So the way this works is it increases the damage to your burning and poison status effects, and this actually got bumped down a little bit to 33%, down from 50%. Now there is a comment here. It says, currently, Dragon Knights are a bit ahead of many other classes in damage production. It's definitely true. To address this, they're easing some of the passive power to reel them slightly back towards other classes without changing too much. So, yeah, that's definitely going to be a reduction in damage due to that passive. Now, an interesting change here to Dragon's Blood, the Dragon Knight heal, specifically Green Dragon's Blood. This morph is now going to add a small heal over time effect lasting 5 seconds, scaling with your max health, so 3% per tick. So a bit of a buff there, I would say. The reason for this in the comment states that they're seeing tank builds opt to take Coagulating Blood instead, which buffs up their offensive stats to eclipse the healing potential of Green Dragon's Blood. So to mitigate this, they're adding a small guaranteed heal that uses your max health to offer some diverging gameplay options. Okay, I actually like that change. And then Dragon Leap, just a fix here. So some big changes having to do with Necromancer. If you main a Necro, you definitely want to pay attention to this section, specifically the Frozen Colossus Ultimate. So what we're seeing here is, this is actually really big. Reduce the cost of the Ultimate and its morphs to 175, down from 225. Now, not only that, but they also increased the damage per hit of all versions of this ultimate by 11%. Pestilent Colossus, this morph now always guarantees the disease status effect. And Glacial Colossus, this morph now extends the duration of major vulnerability to 17 seconds, up from 12. That is a huge buff for Necromancer. Let's see what they said about this, because it's kind of surprising. So this ultimate has been significantly reined in after major vulnerability became less potent and more accessible from other actions in the game. I guess that's true. I mean, they're adding it to sets, a lot of tank sets especially. So this causes the ultimate to no longer instill the same fear it once did. So in order to help rectify this and give some much needed love to Necromancers, they've made it easier to cast with a significant cost reduction and added small damage bonuses. And they also tried to add some more distinction between the morphs. I think that's good too. Pestilent Colossus with the additional damage, the disease, status effect, and Glacial, definitely following the name there, slow and bitter end by extending the major vulnerability duration. Okay, so quite nice buffs for the Necromancer Ultimate. Let me know what you guys think about those in the comments. A nice buff to Deaden Pain here as well, the Necromancer defensive skill. This morph now also increases the duration of the effect to 4 seconds, up from 2. So they said currently this morph is a bit further behind Necrotic Potency in power and engagement. In efforts to try and help the tankier aspect of the ability shine, we're extending the duration to offer more healing and major protection uptime. Again, really nice buffs all around for the Necromancer. Let's jump to Nightblade next, which also got some buffs, surprisingly. I think if you're a Nightblade, this is definitely good news. So Deathstroke and Imcap Strike, this is just a fix for a very old bug, where the special version, basically the 120 ultimate version, could fail to be activated in some cases where your ultimate cost was being affected by bonuses or penalties. So the tooltip, the animations, and the ability to cast will now always be up to date. So that is good news. Now here is a big change, which I am excited to test out once this server is finished updating. So Grim Focus, this ability and its morphs no longer need to be activated to grant stacks. They will now generate stacks anytime you meet their original requirements, simply with the ability slotted on either bar. And I forgot to mention this in the intro, but this kind of goes back to the Arcanist and something new. If you're familiar with that class, the way they designed it, the Arcanist damage ability, one from their offensive skill line, which gives them major sorcery and major brutality, that actually gives them the buff effect on both of your skill bars, no matter what bar you're on, while you have the ability slotted. So that's kind of something new that they figured out, had to add to the game with the Arcanist class. And so they're trying to bring that extra utility to other classes in the games besides the Arcanist, which I think is really great. So this is one of the skills they were able to do that with, Grim Focus from the Nightblade class. So again, you're now going to be able to get those stacks, start generating your stacks, number one, without even casting the ability, so just having it passively on your bar, and also no matter which bar you are on. So if you have this skill on your front bar, you can also generate stacks on the back bar and vice versa. Really cool change in my opinion. Now they did increase the cost, and I think that just makes up for the fact that you don't need to activate it anymore. You also don't need to like rebuff it, which is a nice quality of life update as well. The ability is now going to use consistent names and icons. That's good. They're going to update the tooltip to mention that fully charged heavy attacks grant double stacks. That's always been true, but not explained. So that is good. You can get, 2 stacks at one time with a heavy attack. And the ability will now highlight on your bar when you're at full stacks, rather than becoming a different icon. And then for Relentless Focus, the other morph, this is going to give you some extra weapon and spell damage, 80 per stack, rather than increasing the duration of the buff, since the buff no longer has a duration technically. So I definitely am looking forward to trying this out. I think some people might be a little confused, like this is watering down the skill, but really, in my opinion, it's just making it less clunky, right? You don't need to activate the skill, you don't need to reactivate the skill, and sometimes you get those clicks messed up, right? When you want to cast your Spectral Bow, you accidentally reactivate the skill. Basically, the way I understand this is you'll only activate the skill when your bow proc is ready, when you're at the full 5 stacks. So I think that's really good in terms of just making it less clunky. But again, I will fully test this and let you guys know once the server is up. Another really nice change here is Shadow Cloak. So this ability and Shadowy Disguise now also grant major savagery and prophecy for slotting on either bar. This is going to offer more functionality outside of PvP and ensure the abilities still offer something even when, you're not invisible. So I do really like this change. That's another one of those updated buff things where you can get the passive bonus on both skill bars and only have to slot it on one. Dark Cloak, I believe that's the healing morph, right? This morph now swaps the major savagery and prophecy to minor protection for slotting on either bar rather than granting it for 10 seconds. So you'll get constant minor protection, like on the Tank Nightblade or something like that, by having this skill slotted on either bar, and then you can still use it for the heal, which is a really nice functionality added to Nightblade. Nightblade's looking good, you guys. Some good buffs here. Okay, continuing on to Sorcerer, Daedric Summoning, and Bound Armor. This is getting the same treatment that we just saw with Nightblade. So the ability and its morphs now grant their passive bonuses on both bars while slotted, rather than only on the bar where they are actively slotted. So same thing here. The ability and Bound Aegis now passively grant minor protection while slotted rather than for a duration, so that's very good. And they increase the base max magicka to 8% at rank 4. So that's how it's always been. I believe you just don't have to rebuild it up when you morph the skill. And then Bound Armament, so this is the stamina morph. This ability no longer needs to be activated to be eligible to generate bound weapons. Instead, it will generate bound weapons whenever you light or heavy attack, with the ability slotted on either skill bar. So same thing that we saw with Nightblade. The activation now requires you to have at least one bound weapon active, and additionally highlights when you have all 4 bound weapons active for improved clarity. So a little bit different than the Nightblade, right? For Sorcerer bound armaments, you can activate this at just 1 dagger. You can do 2 daggers, 3, or all 4, and you're going to get a special highlight on the skill when it is maxed out at 4. So that's nice. Also, this is a nice buff too. Fully charged heavy attacks now grant 2 bound weapon stacks rather than 1. So kind of the Nightblade thing there. Really good. And then just some fixes here with Overload, the Sorcerer Ultimate. So this is really interesting too. Now, when I was thinking about Sorcerer and how they would do this, with having the one skill just active on 1 bar and getting the benefit of both, I was wondering if they could technically do that with Sorcerer Pets. Now, I think they could actually do that now with these changes that they're making to passive skills. Now, will they do that on Sorcerer? Well, they didn't do it this patch, and I'm guessing it might be more of a power balance thing. than just an issue of whether they can do it or not, right? Sorcerer pets are already very powerful. Imagine if you only needed to have it on one bar, and now you've freed up all these other bar slots for sorcerers to use even more powerful skills. So that's kind of interesting. I think they could do it, but they might be not doing it for that specific reason. But we'll see if that gets added in the future. Quick fix for Templar Backlash. No buffs or really nerfs for Templar, which is interesting. And same thing for Wardens, just a couple of bug fixes, no specific nerfs or buffs here. So that ends the class balance updates. Again, all buffs here, which is really nice to see, specifically Necromancer, Sorcerer, and Nightblade. Let me know what you guys think about those, and if you think you'll be using those new effects. Now that moves on to weapon skills and weapon passives specifically. A lot of changes here that I was not expecting, and this is going to change your build significantly based on which weapons you're using for your setup. So let's start with bow and what I think is a kind of a nice buff here actually. So the long shot's passive. This now increases your damage done by 5% against enemies within 15 meters of you, and increases your critical chance against enemies that are further than 15 meters from you. That's instead of just the flat damage 12% increase based on range. They also changed the name of the passive to Vine Dusk Training. So let me see what they actually said here first. Wow, this is a big comment. Okay, so in order for bows to feel like additional tools for your character rather than their own isolated play style, we're expanding out this bonus twofold to help it become a more viable option for different builds. Since this passive previously only enhanced other bow attacks, it created situations where the weapon heavily dissuaded you to use other skills, making it feel restrictive rather than additive. Okay, I kind of agree with that. Basically, they're saying this bow passive is very limiting, forcing you to use, other bow skills for your main form of damage, which is true, I think. So by opening the bonus to work with any attack, we hope to help it feel more like other weapons as a way to synergize and play off your other actions. So again, just to be clear here, this increases your damage done with all abilities by 5% if you're within 15 meters of your target, and increases your critical chance with all abilities if you are further than 15 meters. So note that distinction. It's not just buffing bow attacks, it's buffing all skills. Then they talked about, in addition, this passive's minigame was creating situations where it heavily punished many different encounters in both PvP and PvE, where you had to maximize your range at all times. This is definitely true. Basically, if you were in close range, that happens a lot in PvP, even in like solo PvE instances, your bow was very limited. You weren't gaining damage from this passive at all. So the fact that they split this into two different buffs is actually really cool. This opens up a lot more damage for bow PvP builds and solo PvE bow builds, because you're going to get a buff no matter what situation you're in. And also things like the Vatashran bow, which gives you a similar bonus for being close melee range. That's going to be even more viable now. So really cool. Now they did miss one thing here, which I wish they would have dealt with. I forget what the passive's called. You can let me know in the comments, but basically it's the one where you need to light attack, I think every 4 to 5 seconds. And by stacking that up, you gain even more damage with your bow. That's another one that they really need to look at. That does penalize like the Arcanist, for example, when you're using your channeled beam really hard, if not impossible, to maintain that. Any developers, if you're watching, I think we get a lot of benefit from that passive being updated too, but so far this is good. Good change for the bow. Okay, Destruction Staff. This is where things start getting a little bit crazy. So Ancient Knowledge. This is, a passive that gives you different effects based on what type of Destruction Staff you're using. So Flame Staff got changed. This passive now increases your damage done by the initial hit of status effects by 500, rather than increasing your single target damage by 10%. Now, I'm assuming they've run the numbers on this so that the damage is comparable, and they're just trying to change the playstyle a little bit to be more specific and more interesting instead of just, this flat percentage boost. These aren't, that great in terms of passives because, what build is going to use nothing but single target damage skills? Generally, you're going to have a combination of single target and AoE skills. So this is going to give you potentially more of a specific bonus. What that looks like in terms of like changing your DPS, we're not quite sure yet. But they did change the Lightning Staff as well, which is also pretty interesting. So the Lightning Staff passive for Ancient Knowledge now increases your damage done with damage over time and channeled attacks by 12%, rather than increasing your damage done with all area of effect attacks by 10%. So Lightning Staff is not, AoE focused anymore in update 39. It's more focused on dots and channeled attacks. So even for like Templar, Arcanist, of course, with Fate Carver Beam, you're actually going to see a bit of a buff here. But let's see what the comment says. So we've received a lot of feedback from many sources talking about how this passive hasn't lived up to the standards of build crafting, synergy, power. We're shifting the gameplay aspects around to help aid in more overall exciting build choices and keeping in mind elemental strengths. Okay, so Flame focusing on status effect damage, Lightning and doubling down on turning your foes to dust with powerful damage over time and channels. Specifically for heavy attack builds is what they're considering there. So definitely an interesting change, something you'll need to consider for your build's next patch. Penetrating Magic. This is a penetration passive, obviously. So this now causes your Destruction Staff attacks to ignore spell resistance, about 3k. So that's like a minor breach sort of level of penetration rather than 10%. I think that's good, just to be more specific. Okay, Trifocus, they updated this as well. So Flame Staff, this passive now applies a damage over time equal to the power of a standard damage over time effect over 20 seconds with a fully charged heavy attack, rather than increasing the damage of your fully charged heavy attack by 12%. I do actually really like this, and I want to test this out. So basically, if you heavy attack with an Inferno Staff, you now get a free damage over time for 20 seconds. That's actually pretty cool. So you're getting like almost an extra skill on your skill bar if you have an Inferno Staff equipped. Definitely better than the previous passive, which was like 12% bonus on one attack. Except for maybe like some niche PvP builds, I can see this being a nice buff. Now, Ice Staff also looks like it got buffed here, increased the damage shield granted to 33% of your max health. That's a very large shield. But again, I believe that's just for ranged attacks, so that hasn't changed. Now, Lightning Staff. This passive now only triggers on a fully charged heavy attack rather than any tick of a heavy attack. Okay, let's check out the comment here. So since this passive is meant to help reward fully charged heavy attacks, we've reined in some of the effects with Lightning Staves to make them more in line with other weapons while retaining their unique gameplay with builds that go all in on them. In addition, we've tried to sweeten the rewards of the other two staff types. Okay, so this looks to me like just an overall nerf of heavy attack builds and heavy attack damage, which is interesting when they mention them above, trying to support, heavy attack builds with this buff to dots and channeled attacks. This is just a straight up nerf, right? So the passive only triggers on the final hit rather than the damaging ticks before the final hit. So let's break this down a little bit further. If you are doing a single target fight, let's say you're trying to solo a boss, this is going to have no effect on it, right? But on the other hand, if you're trying to clear ads or clear your way through trash, your initial damage is going to be lower until you hit that final tick of the Lightning Staff, and that's where the damage is going to be sent out to the surrounding enemies. So obviously I need to do some testing with this, but I could definitely see this slowing down the ability of heavy attack builds to clear content. Because again, that AoE damage that hits all the targets in the areas, that's just going to be at the end of your attack rather than the, 2 ticks leading up to it. Now the end tick is already the biggest in terms of damage. So, and also just a quick note here for any devs that might be watching, I think the last tick of the Lightning Staff still counts as AoE damage. It's not even, channeled damage. So it's not getting buffed by things that would buff channel damage normally, like the new passive that was just added for Lightning Staff channel damage, like the Deadly Strike set, for example, do not buff that last tick. So if this change does go through, it would be nice if the Lightning Staff was fixed to be like all one damage type. That would definitely simplify things and also make that last tick probably hit for more damage, which might make it more worthwhile, in my opinion. And then just to fix an issue here with Wall of Elements, stacking the Wall of Frost Shield, so not a big deal. Okay, now Dual Wield, Twin Blade, and Blunt. This is a very important passive for Dual Wield builds, and it looks like it actually got nerfed here. So they reduced the bonus of this passive to ensure it's in line with other adjustments being made to weapon passive. So Mace's penetration went down, just very little actually, 200 penetration there. Weapon and spell damage went down on swords, by 13, so not huge. And now daggers grant less critical chance. It looks like it just went down by 1% per dagger. So this is not, huge in terms of what this passive did, but it is a slight nerf. Restoration Staff just fixed an issue stacking the ward shield there, and then two-handed probably got the same nerfs as dual wield. Let's see. So yep, they reduced the bonuses. So maces now grant, about 300 less offensive penetration, and then swords grant about 30 less weapon and spell damage. Okay, they did change the follow-up passive too. This now increases your damage done with all two-handed attacks by 10% for 4 seconds after completing a fully charged heavy attack, rather than increasing the damage of your next direct damage skill by 10%. So they're locking this into two-handed attacks only. So let's see here. Changing the context of this passive to help make the interaction and reward of completing a heavy attack with the weapon feel better by moving away from a one-time burst bonus to a window of opportunity. Oh, I see. So they extended the duration, and it's all two-handed attacks in that window. So a 4-second window. So you can do 4 sort of empowered attacks. That's kind of cool, actually, for two-handed focus builds. Because the previous passive was just your next attack, so one attack directly after. Okay, so I do like that for two-handed builds, again, getting you to focus on your two-handed skills for damage. A couple other quick fixes to Psijic Order, Vampire, Werewolf transformation got a little bit of a nerf, it actually looks like. So summon direwolves no longer snare enemies. That's definitely important if you use that morph. But overall, weapon passives, some big changes here I wasn't necessarily expecting, especially with Destruction Staff. I mean, these were very interesting. They're sort of mixing up what it means to be a Destruction Staff build, not by affecting the skills, but just changing the passives, right? Which is pretty interesting. Like I said, I'll be doing further testing this week to see if this actually makes a difference or not. But for now, let me know what you guys think down in the comments section below. As always, if you enjoyed the video today or you found it informative, do me a favor and crush that like button. And thanks again for watching. I hope you're doing well. Stay safe out there, and I will see you around in the next video. Hey everybody, if you're struggling at all with the Elder Scrolls Online, I definitely know the feeling. I struggled learning the game myself for months. The biggest problem I had was, even though the game says you can play any way you want, it never really teaches you how. Like I said, it took me months of teaching myself how the game works before I could even start to make builds that were both fun and effective to play. Well, I've now put down my system for creating unique builds into a simple step-by-step guide that you can learn to create your own fun and powerful builds for yourself. We're calling this the ESO Zero to Hero Academy, and it's being hosted through Podia, which is an amazing online learning platform. So far, our ultimate build guide has over 25 lessons with over 2 hours of video content, designed to take you from a beginner to a master theory crafter, not in months like it took me, but in just a few hours. So if you want to check out the guide and preview all of the included lessons, just click on the link below to learn more. Thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you there.